This happened about 13 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of my freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks, 6 guys and 1 girl. They all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. And that's precisely what happened. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees, very few streetlights, and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights, just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, we made a left off of the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn and, to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us, turned on its side. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees behind it. We all got out to see exactly what this was, stepped over the log, and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as my imagination. And, in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared. Not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. There was pretty much nothing that could take us down. We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing, and I mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkept grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large, we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone, because there was no way in. And since we were all sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he pointed. We all turned, and, on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean it was skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. The moon was so bright and the woods were so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed him in that direction, and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm, and whispered, "What the hell is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy crap." I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and we were peeling away closer to 5 minutes. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what just happened. My heart was pounding, and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all still friends, living in different states yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, and children. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the other with something to the effect of, "The woods, that really happened, right?" It most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever it was, they were dancing manically in the woods at 1 in the morning, and then ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Whatever the cause may be, when he came for us that night, you could be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. This happened back in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time and out hunting with my dad and a friend of his, Frank. I still remember this day like it was yesterday. My dad and I had several stands spread across an area of about 3/4 square miles. He'd been hunting there for over a decade, and I'd been tagging along with him ever since I was 5. Until I turned 12, I was never allowed to legally hunt. On this morning, we started our day at 5 a.m. I headed to my stand, while my dad and Frank went to 2 other stands about 500 to 600 yards away, over a ridge. Sitting in the dark alone was always a little eerie. Shortly after my dad and Frank left, I noticed a flashlight in the direction they'd gone, about 200 yards away, moving toward me. Assuming they'd forgotten something in the truck, I radioed into them, only to learn they were already settled in their stands. It was clear that it was another hunter, which wasn't an unusual occurrence in these woods. I turned on my light to alert the other hunter was there, but as soon as I did, they stopped walking, turned off their light, and disappeared. It was a bit odd, but I didn't give it much thought at all. I ended up dozing off shortly after, and woke up sometime around 8 a.m. I radioed my dad to inquire about any movement or sightings. He reported nothing, apart from a few distant gunshots. Around this time, I decided to stretch my legs with a brief walk, covering a distance of about 30 yards while trying to remain as quiet as possible. Upon returning to my stand, I scanned my surroundings carefully. I happened to glance to my left, where I had previously spotted the flashlight, and noticed something orange. During gun season, hunters are required to wear orange, so I radioed into my dad and Frank to see if it was one of them. My dad answered and told me it wasn't him, but there was no answer back from Frank, so I grabbed my binoculars from my backpack to get a clearer view of the figure. It became evident that it was definitely not Frank. The person was aiming their rifle directly at me through a scope. I knew that this was a major breach of safety protocol. One of the cardinal rules of hunting is to never point your rifle at something you don't intend to shoot. While it's an uncommon occurrence, some individuals do disregard this rule. This is where binoculars come in handy for proper identification. However, as I looked through the binoculars, the person didn't lower their weapon, even though they knew I was watching them. That's when I started to panic, and I began contemplating worst-case scenarios. Slowly and cautiously, I picked up my rifle, remaining concealed behind trees, and moved away from my stand to get out of his sight. That's when I contacted my dad through the radio to inform him of the situation. He advised me to remain hidden and assured me that he was on his way to my stand in a very laid-back manner. As a 16-year-old especially, I was extremely worried. Looking back now, I could tell that my dad sensed the seriousness of the situation in the tone of my voice, but he remained calm as he spoke to me. At the time, I misinterpreted this as a lack of seriousness on his part. Throughout the course of approximately 10 minutes, I kept an eye on the person. Every time I glanced, they had shifted position, but their rifle remained trained in my direction. My anxiety grew, as their behavior was certainly unsettling. Finally, my dad contacted me on the radio, asking how I was holding up. I explained the ongoing situation, to which my dad responded with reassurance that he was coming closer to my position and would be near me shortly. Then, a gunshot pierced the air, causing me to lose composure momentarily. The questions raced through my mind. Had my dad been shot? Where was he? Did he shoot someone? The minutes that followed felt like hours as I waited anxiously for more information. Eventually, my dad's voice came over the radio. instructing me to come out from my hiding place and head in his direction. Peering cautiously over the little knoll that had concealed me, I spotted my dad waving from a nearby ridge. I began making my way toward him to gain clarity on the situation. As it turned out, Frank, feeling restless, had taken a stroll and unintentionally ended up on the opposite side of the ridge where the stranger had been standing. Frank hadn't realized what was transpiring, as he'd inadvertently dislodged his radio battery earlier that morning. The gunshot I heard was actually Frank getting a deer. My dad recounted that, as soon as Frank had fired the shot, the stranger began walking away from us, heading toward a logging road. With Frank's deer successfully taken care of, we decided to wrap up our hunting for the day. Once we were back on the road, I finally started to relax for the first time I encountered that hunter. But that changed the next day, when I learned something disturbing. The day before we were out in those woods, 6 hunters were shot and killed, while 2 others were injured, not too far away from where we were. The killer's name was Chai Vang, and even to this day, I still have an awful feeling that he was the one aiming the rifle at me. My childhood best friend, Marie, and I were around 11 or 12 years old at the time. Marie's family had their own campsite in a provincial park about 2 hours away from our hometown, and would spend the entire summer each year living in their camper out there. This particular summer, I was able to go and stay with them for a week, and we were excited to spend our time adventuring around the forest. On the last night that I was there, we decided we wanted to hurry down to the ice cream shop by the lake before it closed. It was early evening at this point, still pretty bright out, but beginning to lose light. The path we took was down a short slope right next to the main road, with maybe 10 feet of thick brush and trees in between. On the other side was the forest, with more tall, thick brush. So we were walking along, not seeing a single other person on the path in front or behind us. Suddenly, we heard rustling and snapping of branches, similar to the sound of maybe a deer moving through the woods. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but then, the sound of running footsteps followed. Marie glanced back and suddenly grabbed my arm, urging me under her breath to not look back. At the same time, the running stopped. I don't know why I didn't ignore her and get a look myself. I guess I could sense the real fear in her voice and chose to listen. We both started to panic, getting that feeling like when you're running up the stairs after turning the basement light off. We picked up speed as much as we could without breaking into a sprint, knowing the ice cream shop was only about a minute walk away at that point. The path soon broke, and we were in the parking lot. Suddenly, Marie steered me hard to the left, heading towards the lake and the boat rental instead of continuing straight to the ice cream shop. I went along with it silently, understanding ice cream was no longer an interest right now. Marie was clearly panicking at this point. We were both looking around, but it seemed that whatever scared her was nowhere in sight at this point. Marie walked up to the boat rental and got us a kayak, and we climbed in and began to paddle out into the middle of the lake. As we were paddling, she told me that there was a man behind us, and that the man had stopped running at us very abruptly upon making eye contact with her. He had been wearing a long black coat with the hood up, despite it being the middle of July, had a terrible smirk on his face, and she swore that as he stopped running, she saw him put something shiny into his coat. He appeared to have just emerged out of the bushes after we walked past, given the sounds we heard right before he came running onto the path. We reached the center of the lake and stopped paddling. I pulled out my Nokia brick phone that my parents had thankfully given me just in case. I handed it to Marie and told her to call her parents to pick us up. As the phone rang, I saw her look out past me to the shore and go pale, lifting a hand to point to what she was seeing. I turned, and there was the man, stalking his way around the path that circled the edge of the lake, staring right at us. We sat in the middle of the lake and watched him do 2 full laps, never looking away from us, before finally disappearing. It took a few tries to get a hold of her family. We were freaking out so bad the whole time, especially because the sun continued to get lower and lower. We did manage to have someone come with the truck, but by the time we reached the shore, it was pretty dark outside. I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't been able to call for a ride. Looking back, I don't know why we didn't just go to the ice cream shop, inform an adult there, and ask our parents to come get us then. But it worked out. We got back safe, and we thankfully never saw the man again.